Darling Reefers, it's the last episode of Coral Freaks and Audience With, and in this episode we have the live Q&A from the audience, so sit back, relax and enjoy the episode.
Okay, it's question time. This is going to be a good session. Please, if you've got any questions, don't hesitate, put up your hand. There is no stupid question, we all learn, and for any of the members or all of them of the panel, that would be fantastic. Does anyone want to start us off? Any questions? Paul's going to come over with the mic. Get your cardio on.
So a question, I guess, to all of you. What are your thoughts on theory that low voltage electric current improves coral growth? And the reason I'm asking, I went diving in Lombok last year, and one of the sites I was diving on had cables basically leading from the shore, and they were attached to the racks on which corals grow.
Okay, so low voltage electricity to better grow, and to settle corals.
Yeah, so it's a mechanism called biorocks, or MAT, mineral accretion technology. And so you put a metal frame in the ocean and you ultimately attach, like you say, an electrical current to it. So one side is a cathode, one side is the anode, and the theory is it basically concentrates your calcium, magnesium ions locally to that metal frame, and it's supposed to then accelerate coral growth. It's used a lot, like you say, in Indonesia. There's projects out in the Maldives, stuff in Saudi Arabia. The data I've seen from it is it's very marginal. There's an increased growth initially, but as the colony grows and grows away from the metal frame, there's statistically no difference between, just putting a fragment on a metal frame. But there's a lot of it going on. I saw some in Bali only a couple of months ago, similar thing. I think there's better ways of doing it, personally.
Do our aquariums carry a bit of voltage as well?
I'm sure they do, yeah. I mean, we have electrical pens around the place to see when there's stray voltage going on.
Any more questions? Next question, please. Got a question from Paul K. Are you going out there?
You've got a few, haven't you, I think? Yeah. I did do questions for everyone. That's all right. Hi, Paul Push Button Reef, big fan. I'll ask, Jamie, I'll ask my question to you first. I thought the stuff you was talking about was fascinating, really, really interesting, and it kind of like, if I could do something like that in my own tank, it would be amazing, which was kind of going to be my question, but what I really want to know is, what can we do to help?
That's interesting. I think everyone should be trying to do this. You know, I see coral breeding is no different to clownfish breeding and all the possibilities, potentially good and bad, that can bring. We've done a lot of work looking at hybridization and production of chimeras. That will open up a whole area in the industry. So I would advocate anyone to go and have a crack at this. I really would. I don't think it's as difficult as people think it is. We were talking about, I'll try and produce some video content this year during the spawning events and stick it out to really kind of talk through the process of how we do it. And you'll see it's really not rocket science. The caveat I would say to that is I really hope there's going to be more organizations wanting to spawn and rear corals, whether it's in the US or Europe or things like that. My big concern with that is it then cuts out the source of where these corals come from. And we need to be doing it at source location. And the way that the hobby can help is pay a little bit extra to buy those sexually produced corals that will start coming into the trade. So Australia is now selling them in America. That's brilliant. That's the first step of this sustainable production line. And it's voting with your wallet, I suppose. And so I hope that it carries on developing in source nation, and that's, I think, how we can all help.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Okay, a question for Pat and Trina. I'm sure many of us would have come across the suggestions for a modified AB plus spectrum when using radiant LED lighting, where the red and green are cut from the suggested 30% mix to 10% or less. Often this modification is justified with the aim of reducing nuisance algae growth, but the effects on this change on our corals are rarely discussed. What are your thoughts? When you were playing with red light, did it cause algae?
Well, you can see on the Radion settings, it's already extremely low on AB+. And the goal on those settings also that you can't forget was this setting was designed to try to make the most number of corals react just like they would under T5. So everyone kind of agrees, T5, you can throw anything under it. So when we were doing those settings, it's like this setting is going to give you the spectrum so that just the most number of pieces are going to do well under here. There are definitely settings that you can do that are going to improve coloration. There are definitely going to be settings that you can do that would decrease algae. We didn't try it ourselves necessarily, and we found a greater decrease in algae by the shorter photo period at a higher intensity compared to a longer photo period at a lower intensity.
So say that again, a shorter photo period.
Yeah, so
with a higher intensity caused more algae?
Less, actually.
Less algae.
So your algae takes a longer time to start photosynthesizing. So by having a higher intensity for a shorter duration, we found that we had significantly less growth of algae in the tank. So our photo period is 8 hours, and that's it. We're getting everything we need within 8 hours. And in the other tank where we had the 12 hours, we had problems with hair algae, we would get more bubble algae, we would get more film on the glass, we were adding more cleanup crew, and by using the higher intensity for the shorter duration, same DLI value, like your same overall intensity, we had way less algae there. So we approached it on a kind of different aspect.
Can I ask, at what intensity would you run the radions at your high intensity?
We would keep them at a lower intensity per unit, but then we would try to add more units, because on a radion, if you're going to run it at 100%, it's not gonna last ultimately as long. So typically we would run it at like 60%, 50%, and if you need a higher par value to get the growth that you want, put them closer, add more. And the difference is that you could take a G1 that's been run at 50%, and then open it up and actually look at the puck and check for damage on a G1 puck. And 8 years after it had been in service, it looks brand new to this day. But you take that same light and run it at 75%, and then the heat is going to kill the puck. And that's what's going to cause premature failure. And so if you're running a G5 or G6 now, you know, you're better off if you're setting up a tank, get one extra from what you think you need and turn it down on intensity. So get the par that you want, not from adjusting your intensity, but from adding more lights.
Okay.
The short intensity, when you say long intensity to short intensity, are you saying an 8-hour photo period to a 12-hour photo period?
Yeah, that was our comparison, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Whole panel, or whoever wants to take it, coral skeletons. Some corals have been reported to regenerate from the skeleton of the dead mother coral, e.g. Fungia species. Should we keep a coral graveyard in our sumps in the hope that they will regrow? Anyone had anything re-sprite?
Absolutely. Do it, because when you look at Fungia in the ocean, in the wild, they're when you look at the Fungias in the wild, you notice that they're growing off of their dead mother skeletons.
Yeah.
And they produce more. And I've seen it even in captivity. There was a person I visited in Washington, D.C., and she had this dead mother colony, and the babies were just zooming out of that mother colony. And in the shop, I actually do the same thing. Whenever a Fungia dies, I take that Fungia and I put it somewhere. I just don't throw it in a bin. I put it somewhere in hopes that it'll spurt babies, and sometimes they do.
We do the same thing too, Tony. We put ours like under the rack or in an overflow and off to the side.
And watch the babies come.
Sometimes it takes a couple of years. You don't necessarily see it right away. Sometimes you flip it over and it's underneath, right? And we'll take like the Fungia fraellas, and we're almost on an F2 right now for that Fungia, where it came as a baby off of a piece. We grew it out to around 10 inches, and then this sounds terrible, you take a fork and literally go through the face of the coral to kind of kill it off, but you don't want to kill it deep inside those veins, and then basically it'll look like the coral has died, and then all of a sudden from inside those veins it starts cranking out babies.
Right.
So that we've done that intentionally as well.
And since we're on the topic of fungias, I remember when I started doing I was writing for a national publication, and every 2 months I would do featured coral. And what I noticed was I was looking at some of the experts at the time, and they were suggesting how to keep corals. And I noticed that when I followed their recipes, I wasn't as successful until I started scuba diving. And when I saw these animals in the wild, I said, whoa, hold on a second. This changes everything. And Fungia is an example of that. When I first started in the hobby, the #1 requisite for keeping the Fungia, put it on the sand bed. No, you do not put a Fungia on the sand bed. They are so heavy that they suffocate the epidermis that's under them. So the Fungia's epidermis reaches all the way under them, and if there's no water circulation under it, it suffocates that area, killing the coral. So when I started scuba diving, I noticed every time I saw dead Fungias, they were on the sand bed. The live ones were actually creeping on corals or on rubble because it allowed the epidermis to get flow underneath it. And I realized the experts that I were listening to never even dove the ocean. So they were just trying to give you information on something that they were trying to figure out and wasn't there. But Fungia, since we're on the topic, required to be put on something that allows them to breathe from under.
Thank you. Any questions? Anyone? Sir?
Hello. Is there any treatment for zoopox? It just came out of nowhere. No,
Zoopox?
Yes, no new addition to a tank.
Anyone, any thoughts? Stan, Patentrina, zoopox, you heard of it?
I've heard of it, I've never actually had it, so.
So occasionally, if we have a particularly neglected colony somewhere where there's like a lot of detritus that tends to build up and get collected in between the polyps, we might see that. I don't know if my suggestion is going to be very helpful because we have a product called Furane 2, and that tends to clean it up a bit. I don't know if that's available here. The other thing is just keeping the colony cleaner in general will really help. And occasionally I've gone through and just kind of like popped those white marks like as if they were zits, and then keep the colony cleaner. That also tends to help. But I think it's oftentimes more of like a reaction to like a lot of deposits on the coral.
Would you dip it, Than?
Sure, and the nice thing about zoas is that they are so resilient to all kinds of dips that a freshwater dip for a short amount of time is something that they can tolerate. So that might be an issue. That might be an option, I should say.
What do you consider short water dip?
Under 5 minutes.
Under 5 minutes, okay.
Yeah.
I wash my zoas when they come in actually with a garden hose.
With fresh water?
With a garden hose?
Yeah, there's so much detritus in there. There's so much nasty critters in there. There's so much gross stuff in there that you got to get out. We literally just take the garden hose in the sink and spray it off with tap water. I don't know that I would recommend that for everybody, but that's definitely what we do.
And they do fine.
They're fine. Better. They're open in 5 minutes.
Well, no, I get that. However, when I dip a coral, I always try to keep a close eye because you'll get copepods, amphipods, and you're sacrificing them, and they're actually beneficial to the aquarium.
Yeah.
So just, when you do soak them, just keep an eye on it because there's little baby brittle stars that you can find. I always look for something special within anything that I dip. So keep an eye open when you dip.
David Saxby, a question.
I'd like to hear the team's view about CITES. Would it not be much better if frags were CITES exempt, so that everybody could buy frags and make sure they came from, America, all around the world? Isn't that a much better idea than what's going on at the moment, and keeping them under the CITES regime? Isn't that going to help the hobby if they could be taken out, and also help the corals that remain will continue to be preserved?
Trina.
Okay, so I just want to check. So David, you're talking about CITES being exempt for people who are trading frags within the hobby, or from
country to
stores?
country.
From country to country.
So a lot of the English guys want to buy American frags, but we're not allowed to.
Mm-hmm.
Even cultured, farmed, spawned, whatever.
So I can speak from an importer's perspective, and especially someone who's gone overseas. The danger, I think, with that, if it's not regulated at all, is that I think there needs some regulation, because what I have seen from when we've gone to other countries where there is culturing going on, it's like everything. There are people who do things well and properly, and there are people who skirt the rules, and there are people who are outright breaking laws. And I think that's something that we've seen when we've traveled specifically to Bali, and we've gone, and people will offer to break up a mother colony, one that should never be even touched, and to sell you a piece of it on that spot, ship it to you later that week. So my concern would be, I think there could be the potential for people to buy wild colonies, break them into many small pieces, and then send them off. That would be my only thing personally, that I would be concerned about that if it was completely unregulated. I think there's benefits, but... Yeah.
I think what David really sort of means is that, like, for example, in Florida, where I've visited Chris and other people, they all have aquaculture permits. Top Shelf has aquaculture permits. The problem is that the CITES sometimes can be so restrictive that, in theory, if they've got an aquaculture permit and you can prove that that animal is being cultured properly, there should be a very easy transfer, and CITES and DEFRA and these other organisations should probably somehow work with these aquaculture permits. I know Jamie, for example, if he wanted to export his spawned babies right now to the US, he would have to go through so many hoops to do that in order to prove that they're this and that. I think that's where David's going with it.
My view is, as hobbyists, we want to be able to stop taking things from the wild and grow them ourselves. And if we do that, we'll keep the hobby going. But if we continue to plunder from the sea, and we can't shift corals around, as Jamie's now breeding them, so he's going to be in a good position to make sure they travel around the world, but he can't because the paperwork is not designed for that. And it needs to be made easier and made harder to bring in the mother colonies, only on an exceptional use. That's my view, because I think we're doomed otherwise.
Okay, can I say something? Okay, David, I understand where you're coming from, but from a guy who's been to the Philippines 15 times, Indonesia 12 times, Fiji several times, if you do not get the natives that live in those vicinities actively involved in mariculturing corals, those corals will disappear. And I think you've seen it as well, where if you could educate the locals from those areas how to grow corals, mariculture them, and sell them to the trade, and not use the wild colonies. And bear in mind, where those corals are being maricultured is creating new breeding grounds, and those are becoming nurseries. And this is a very important, not for just them, because it brings them a source of income, but it also makes them protect those areas from people who would create damage by using dynamite, cyanide, or whatever. So there's more to this than just us as the hobby looking to benefit from having corals as frags and things like that, because you are helping these third world countries and you're also helping them take care of their local reefs.
Yeah. Biopiracy. There's a word that's being used at the moment around called biopiracy, which is that if you take an animal for, in other words, if we all just kept it within our hobby, those corals actually originally, obviously say it's an Indonesian staghorn or say it's a clownfish even, once upon a time that actually belonged to those people or those island nations. So yeah, you're right. If we take everything and stop, say, even international trade with wild species, there is a danger that those reefs become non-profitable to them.
Yeah.
So would you agree, Jamie?
Yeah, I think the fact that Australia, with monsoon aquatics and interfish, have started spawning these amazing corals out there. I think they've been growing them in country for probably 18 months, 2 years. While they worked on regulatory change to be able to ship them out to America. So they've now achieved that, and they're now available, aquaculture corals. So we have got a grant working in Indonesia, working with the Indonesian government. We've sent over 3 spawning units and a grow-out system. And the plan with that is we're going to be working with the Indonesian government to spawn LPS corals, so acanthophyllias, trachyphyllias, all of the things that we know need that sustainable aquaculture. And the idea behind it will create the blueprint that then other aquaculture facilities within the country can then do the same thing. But I suppose with that, the flip side is CFAS in this country have produced a booklet in the last couple of years, because when it comes into country, we're relying on the border force to have the knowledge of what is aquacultured, what is asexually fragmented, what has been done properly and grown in the ocean properly versus something that is, try to go round the back door. And so it's a very complex beast, I think, to make sure that it's done right. There's a lot of appetite for people to do it right, but there are people that equally want to, play the system.
Circumvent the system.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Actually, Jamie, Laura Carlin was very fundamental in that booklet
100%.
that came out. And I think that's the concern is that I agree with David, we should be able to internationally trade in frags from country to country if there is a proven aquaculture permit and you understand the animals. But likewise, I think it's very important that we keep our wild and mariculture doors open as long as they're well regulated. But I think as soon as you start making paperwork really tight, you encourage an illegal trade versus a legal trade. So there is, I think it needs some deregulation, as David suggested. It is a pain in the arse that I can't go pop over to America, and hobbyists are doing it anyway. The long and short of it is, if you can't stop drugs, it's corals, there's a legal transfer taking place anyway. So I think some deregulation, I think, is where David's suggesting. I would agree.
But here's the other issue with regulation. It costs money, right? Every new department that's made to regulate something costs money. So now, for example, I had a long conversation with Barnett that he is fishing the Genacanthus semifasciatus and the yellow tangs all the way from this island so far up north. But when he retrieves that fish, he has to go to fisheries and pay for that paperwork. Then from that fisheries, when he lands in Manila, he has to meet with the other fisheries that he's going to pay for that paperwork as well to bring it to his location to then ship out. Now, for the guy that's making $50 a month, right? $50 a month, he's going to circumvent those 2 areas and try to sneak the fish all the way into Manila to get it shipped out. So this is where the problem comes. whenever you put regulation, it costs money. And that money, for someone who can't afford it and can make a few dollars doing it illegally, will do it. So, you know, it's hard to create regulation to then get it circumvented by people who are broke and don't have money. So it's a double-edged sword, and it's a tough one to thread.
Thank you very much. Any questions, sir? Oh, sorry. You next at the back.
Where, sorry? Where?
That chap there.
Thanks, Paul. Question to the whole panel, and it seems quite clear that it would be possible with the right scale to maintain captive fragging as a way of maintaining the sustainability of our hobby, but notwithstanding the effect on the local communities with which these corals come. But from what Jamie has said, it sounds like we're on an inevitable march towards extinction in the wild anyway, due to the rapid changing of the climate. So at what point do we have to be looking to be scaling this process and perhaps even considering moving the reefs into an area where they will be naturally now able to sustain the temperatures?
Okay, I'll just say one thing. There's a coral that's an example to something that you're speaking about, and it's the Stylophora milka. That Stylophora milka is from the Red Sea. That's where it originated. So if anybody does the genome on it, they'll find that there's 2 variations of them, and they both came from the Red Sea. That coral exists more on land continents than it does in the Red Sea. So we're already heading in that direction, because I remember when milka was first on the market, how expensive was it?
It was very expensive, yeah.
Now everybody has broken frags in their tank of the milka.
He's got a pile of them in the corner of the tank.
Exactly. They've severed thickets of it. So we are heading already in that direction. The Stuber acropora is an example. That was the first coral kept in captivity. It grew out of Dietrich Stuber's tank in Germany back in the 70s. He had no idea how it grew, and it came on a live rock.
78, David.
78. And that coral today is on every continent on the planet. Wow. Right, so we are heading in that direction. Are there some species that are more difficult? Absolutely. The large polyp stonies, like you say, are very difficult, but we're heading there. Anyone else have?
Yes, so there's actually a coral wholesaler that is about an hour from Tidal Gardens, and Paul had visited them with us when he visited the U.S. You won't see a lot of video of them just because their owner does not like to encourage video of his place. He actually even paid me to shoot a video and never allowed me to shoot it. But it is a phenomenally large facility, kind of betting on the idea that wild-caught corals, that party might be over. And to give you an idea of how big it is, every single set of systems that they're putting in now are $1 million a piece, and he's putting in like 5 of them in the next year.
What's it called, Than?
Eye-catching coral.
It's in an airport hangar. That's how big it is.
Gigantic.
The freshwater tower is probably 3 or 4 stories tall, just for the reserve of freshwater.
So their freshwater RO system, just to hold the purified water, requires its own scaffolding deck that's 1,000 square feet. That's a small house around their freshwater system. Yeah.
And so did you say they're kind of not banking on, but hedging their bets against an import ban or a total import ban?
Exactly. But I think that once they're done with this particular expansion, the amount of square footage dedicated to actual farming, not just chop shopping, not new wild intake, it's probably going to be 2 to 1 true farmed versus wild of any kind.
See, and that's a company that I would be afraid of, because that company's initiative is to shut everybody else down. Seriously.
Isn't that every company?
No. Well, let's hope not.
That's business.
Let's hope not.
That sounds like capitalism.
But, you know, that's the kind of company that would try to fight for regulation to prevent the importation of corals so they can have the monopoly of, or because they're so big.
Okay. Okay, moving on. Jamie, did you want to chip in? Yeah, I'm going to go for the guy in the back after Jamie.
What I would say is, in terms of, I feel like from the reproduction side, we now have an infinite possibility of creating new colour variations and keep exciting new corals coming into the industry. So I don't think the industry is going to stop. It will be potentially different in those 10 years' time if that import completely ceases. So I think there's still plenty of opportunity. And it is a fickle industry, right? The milker was expensive, then everyone has it, it's cheap. So what is the next new thing coming down the line? It's, you know, so I think through reproduction, there's lots and lots of opportunity there. I would still just say it would be brilliant that this aircraft hangar was happening in Indonesia, for instance, with the right backing, so that that biopiracy aspect is taken care of, and you foster protection of their own natural resources, and people benefit in those developing nations as well. That's the perfect model, in my opinion.
I think on one of your recent talks, you mentioned a project they call it in situ, don't they, as opposed to ex situ. So they were working on heat-resistant corals, but at that location in wherever it was, Indonesia or Fiji. Or can you give us an example of that? Or so that everyone then keeps their jobs and they're not doing cyanide and it's all good and it's in place and they can then export.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about Palau, I think, yeah. So in Palau, we've been working for the last 6 years, looking at this, whether supercorals, in inverted commas, is actually a thing. So we've been selectively breeding. It's run by James Guest up at Newcastle University. Just published a paper in the last week, which is the culmination of that 6 years of research. What we've shown with that is when you breed two individuals that have thermal resilience, the F1 generation inherit that, but what's really important, as we've shown it's multi-generational inheritance. So you can selectively breed and it remains in, so we've seen that thermal resilient transfer into the F2 population. The challenge is that enough to keep pace with climate change? So James and his team have shown that a 1 degree thermal increase we can selectively breed for. So that's offering some future hope. I think that's what we were talking about, wasn't it? Yeah.
The gentleman at the back. You, sir, were you waving earlier? No, you done? Next.
Go on, Carl. Come on, Carl. You've got a question, have you? Go on, then. Well, go for it.
Okay, Paul's coming.
Shy. You're not normally shy.
Would you say global warming is making a massive difference on the corals in the ocean all over the world?
Yes,
absolutely.
100%.
100%. And the fish and the inverts. We've had a Caribbean supplier that died a few years ago, and leading up to that, it was that he was diving far too often. So, for example, like you can see it. The best example of that is in Florida, where the average temperatures are just through the roof. And so everybody goes, well, I want orange Recordia. Yeah, good luck. You're not going to get it for a while. You have to have the colder temperature to have the orange Recordias there. And so one of our suppliers, he was diving, and then he'd be doing diving on too many tanks. And you know, these guys are just trying to get enough money together to put food on the table and gas in their boat. And you know, we saw the effects on him leading up to him, where he was becoming forgetful continually. His aggression level was going up, and it's that his mind was foggy because he's having to dive on too many tanks every week just to get blue leg hermits and you know, whatever Caribbean items we want for our aquarium. So it's definitely having an impact there. And then he's going more often, and he's going deeper to the point of his own detriment. And luckily his family has taken over the business, and now his family is running it, and we still choose to support them above and beyond supporting anybody else, even if they had a better price. We will always stay with that supplier. That's the right ethical thing to do. But in that micro scale, global warming has had a disastrous effect on many, many people.
And last, we've just come out of the 4th global mass bleaching. So it spanned 2023, 2024. Last year in Florida, the temperatures got up to 32 degrees. There's big coral restoration frames all through these plastic frames that grow asexual fragments ready for planting out. The water was getting so bad, they were emptying their frames and bringing them in land-based facilities to protect them, to make sure they didn't die. That's the kind of state that we're in, that the ocean is not habitable for these animals, and we have to keep them in aquariums during the summer months. Then they got planted back out again, once the temperatures drop back down. That isn't a sustainable model going forwards. But Florida is the tip of the iceberg, and it will be, the same situation is going to be occurring. It already is occurring in many places around the world.
Thank you.
Jason, did you have a
Florida is particularly affected because the water stays so shallow going in for so far. But then when you look at Grand Cayman is very, very deep water immediately off the coast. And then this year, I think the last 2 or 3 years, Grand Cayman now is suffering the same fate as Florida, where the corals have bleached out and the temperatures have stayed super, super high. So for Grand Cayman, they typically rely on storms coming in, and that storm comes in, it brings the cold water up from the deep, and then that cold water cools down the reef. Well, it's not just like, changing temperature. In this case, it's like the storm patterns have changed there. So they're not getting that storm that comes in and cools down the reef in the summer months. And so because of that, you've got a massive changing of the temperature of any of the corals near the coast.
I was out there in October last year, and the whole reef was white.
Right.
The whole reef. Yeah.
Wow.
Dad, I think Jason might
That
have
chap
a question,
there.
actually.
I'll give him that run.
Quite a simple question, I think, but with the increase in popularity of trace dosing, water change or no water change?
Oh, water change or water change for all 5 of you. For all 5 of you.
Okay.
Starting with Tony.
100% water change.
Jamie.
And hold on.
No.
I give a reason
why.
Jamie?
I used to use the Trident method. I don't anymore. 100% water change for me.
Okay.
Water change.
Yeah.
Trina.
100% water change.
Water change, definitely.
Oh, unanimous.
David's
Okay.
going to say no.
David's going to say no.
Here we go, David. David's going to say no.
Wait. Can I say why?
Yep.
I haven't done a water change for nearly 3 years.
Okay.
There's always one.
And you know what? It's the one that won the award. Okay, so what I want to say is, how many out there, and raise your hands, when you do a water change, your corals just explode. They get puffy. They do their polyp extension. How many? Come on, be real. How many?
About half the room, roughly.
Okay. And that is my proof as to why it's important to do the water changes. Because your corals actually react better to the water change, because now you're putting in stuff. And also, bear in mind, does anyone here realize how fish live in salt water? Do you know that your fish is drinking salt water on a daily basis? And by you adding this new salt water, you're actually helping your fish. The scales get shinier and the fish look better. And your corals respond to it. So water changes, I agree, 100%.
I've seen it from both sides, so I've experimented with both, water changes and no water changes. In actual fact, I find that coral growth, you're right, Tony, David is right, I've seen benefits to both sides of it. So there's less instability by not doing water changes. And I think really the craft is if you are going to do water changes, you need to be very careful how you do water changes.
Well, and yes, and there's a method to it. The problem is, and I've seen this now that I have a shop that I deal with customers on a daily basis, their number one problem is that they don't stay consistent with the type of salt, period. Every salt manufacturer has a different recipe to their salt mix. And if you take and you use Instant Ocean today, and tomorrow use D&D, and the following day use Fritz, you're going to have a problem, because all of them are inconsistent. The tank gets acclimated to a certain specific salt, and it loves that salt, and it does well with it. The minute you change it into something else, then you're asking for trouble.
To further that, I think your salt should be similar parameters to what you're trying to do your water change to. So if you want to keep your alkalinity at 8 and you're doing a water change and your alkalinity is 12 or 14, that's not a good idea. Your salt water should have the values that you're targeting. So I absolutely believe in doing the ICP tests. I absolutely believe in dosing the trace elements. I have personally seen a difference and massive results on that. But at the same time, when I'm doing my water change, I want my salts to have similar values to what I'm targeting. And we always say, when in doubt, do a water change. Something is wrong. I'm not sure what it is. I don't have an ICP test. Maybe I should go to the store and get one. Okay, or just do a really big water change. And chances are you're going to fix whatever that problem was, and you can continue with your dosing.
And there's been a lot of discussion recently of, obviously ICP is giving us so much information about the inorganic water chemistry, but there's an awful lot we can't test still. And you know, the discussion that Salem has been putting out there about DOCs recently and mitigation methods around that, we can't test things like, you know, perfumes, aerosols that are in there. And that is the benefit, I think, of the water change. There's still stuff we can't really tell what's wrong, but it's diluting some of that. Yeah, all of those. All of those.
It's not to say that it's not possible, as David's evidence. It's like, and I've proved it. I went about 8 or 9 months without a water change on the display tank over at IAC. So it's not to say, but I'm in agreement, Jamie. There are things that we don't know about. There are, you know, just plastics, and there's bits. There's things that we can't see on an ICP, is what I think. And there's also sometimes maybe a cost issue. You know, if you're using loads and loads of manganese, and if your salt mix has got it, you might as well just do a water change or whatever it is. There are times where I think on a commercial basis it makes more sense. I'd be interested to see why FANG does water changes.
So I was actually just thinking about that. On a scale commercial facility, I don't think there's a such thing as a non-water change system, because you're taking corals out, shipping them all over the country practically daily. You're taking water out, making dips. Speaking of like just little like tasks around the farm, I happen to like to siphon. I like to remove detritus piles, and so I'm removing detritus, but using water as the vector for that. So even if we said, guys, no more big volume water changes, there's still probably 1,000 gallons a week leaving my facility in other forms. So I don't think that we could even avoid it if we wanted to.
Certainly not on a commercial scale.
Right.
You're always doing water changes, you're scraping tanks down, you're shipping stuff out. So we're going through 250 gallons on a busy day on a regular basis. So am I doing a specific designated water change? Never, right? But are we siphoning every day? Yeah, that's happening. Are we shipping corals? Are we shipping inverts? Are we shipping all that stuff out? Yeah, so that's kind of where our water changes come in, is from that, as opposed to a designated water change.
I think it also transfers all the way down to nano reefs as well. So from the right at the very end, where you've got massive commercial facilities that you can simply easier to do a water change for micro trace element reasons, but then also down at the very small scale, where you've got very limited amount of trace in a small box that's packed with corals. I think it probably would be easier to do the small level. But like I said, there are those there that David, I'll be interested to see a little bit more what David says, because he's begging me to get his oar in. I'm coming.
The thing about water changes is very simple. The redox drops like a stone. You do not have the same. The corals take at least a day to come out nice and fluffy. They're not instantly fluffy, as you call it, and fluffy is a very crude way of judging how good a coral is or not. And then on the other side, there are a lot of people who want a simple life, and they're not trying to maintain the finest aquarium, and they will change water because it's the easiest way. I started when there were no calcium reactors, no calcium could be measured, there weren't tests for it, so I used to mix up my salt water in a 40-gallon or 50-gallon container, and I used to drip it in and let it overflow out the tank in a hole 24/7. You know, very simple, just putting in salt water and putting fresh water in when the salinity went up. You know, there was no test to measure them, and the tank was gorgeous.
I think the only thing I would say, you know, after talking to all the ICP guys, it is possible in their defence to do a bad water change. You know, your RO, your DI, the stuff that, because that's their argument, and I have to agree with it. In that if you've got a perfect ICP, well, by changing the water, you could make it worse, actually. You know, salts aren't mixed necessarily very well. Your RO and DI can let all sorts of nasty things through, which build up, especially with your ATO water as well. So I can definitely see both sides of it.
So the question is still very controversial, isn't it? Because ultimately, I think one of the things David just said there is a lot of us are too busy nowadays to do a lot of the maintenance that perhaps we did do. So I think if you get to the level, you accept the system for what it is, then so it's possible. But I think most of us on a commercial basis, we're all doing water changes, like Fan said, in some way anyway. Yeah, and sometimes it is the easiest thing to fix, isn't it? If you're not sure what's wrong, it's the easiest thing to do. But David's evidence of the fact that the no water change system can
100%.
work.
It's proven, 100% proven, yeah.
I think we did have a question. Gentleman in the blue top.
Chap in the blue T-shirt, Paul. 2 seconds, we're coming over.
My dad's well and truly getting his card.
Yeah, it's still along the water changing kind of idea. Is the difference between large water changes and continuous water changes? Has anybody tried that to see the difference in the benefits for it?
The math on it is pretty terrible to do a continual water change. If you're looking at the average and you're looking at, oh, okay, I do a 25% water change and it's this many gallons. To have the same effect on a continual water change, I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but I sat down and nerded out for a few minutes and did the math on it. To achieve the same result of actually changing the water on a percentage basis, the continual water changes are terrible. In terms of consistency, the continual water changes are obviously way better. But if you actually sit down and you think about it, you're like, okay, I'm going to do a 1% water change. So 99% times my existing parameters and 1% times these parameters, and just keep repeating that equation. How many times do you have to get to the same effect as just doing one single larger water change, right? Is it 5? There you go. Yeah. Yeah, so the continual water change, you'd have to use 5 times more water to have the same effect as just one larger water change, right? So for stability, the continual water change is better. But if you want to use 5 times as much water, yeah, good idea. Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Anyone else have any thoughts on that on the panel? Big water change or constant, small, partial water change? No? Settled?
Settled.
It's with Patrick. That gent at the front there in the glasses. Please, Paul.
Mr. Peter Newson.
Yeah, all it was sort of leading on from the water changes, the phosphates and nitrates, the general consensus always used to be less than 0.03, blah, blah. Now everyone seems to be running a lot higher. What is your view of what is better? Is it running a higher phosphate of around the 0.2, 0.1, or is it better to keep it lower?
So question for all 5 again. What numbers do you shoot for, please? Phosphate and nitrate. Tony.
Phosphates, I shoot for...
Mike, Tony.
Phosphates, I shoot for 0.7 to 0.3, and nitrates, I try to keep under 5.
Jamie?
At work, we're probably running at about 0.1 to 0.15 for phosphate. Nitrate, around 10, something like that. Some of the systems go a bit higher. At home, I've been trialling just leaving everything. So I've taken all GFO off and managing it through water changes. So it's quite elevated at about 0.25 phosphate, so it's pretty high. And then my nitrate's about 15. I would say we've seen a lot better results with things like Melia pora allowing that phosphate to come up, and we have a lot less rapid tissue necrosis as a result. Polyps are out more, and we're getting really good growth, even with it elevated.
Than.
So I think on average, our systems with phosphate are probably around 0.15 parts per million, and our nitrates are typically between 5 to 10, if I had to guess.
That sounds quite similar to Jamie's figures,
Yeah.
0.15 and 10. That sounds like that 100 to 1 ratio as well of phosphate to nitrate. Do you believe in that?
No, so this is a point of contention with myself and my staff, because I actually don't care. At all.
Dan doesn't care, everyone. Let's go home. Let's all go.
But some of my managers are like, absolutely, you know, they're super fastidious about this. That's all they care about. I'm like, we've had phosphate levels of 2 parts per million. Nothing died.
Wow.
So, but they care. I give them a lot of autonomy at the office. But me personally, if it's remotely in the range, I'm fine.
Trina.
I think remotely in the range is typically our target, right? Like, I never test my phosphates, and realistically, every now and then I'll test my nitrates, and on a heavily loaded coral system, the problem is getting nitrates. I'm not trying to keep them down, but the corals are consuming them constantly, and so our biggest challenge is making sure we have some nitrates that we can test for. So in most of our facilities, we're trying to continually increase our bio load of fish, because the number of corals per square foot means that it's just consuming all of our nitrates. We're looking at one of our friends has suggested ammonia dosing, and then using the ammonia to basically see the nitrate down the line. I'm not doing that, but it's been suggested, right? And my preferred method is just to load the systems with more fish, and if we have some nitrates present, fantastic. What are they right now? No idea.
Jamie, so this is the really odd thing. So I was always taught that at 0.03 or less, we'll see less calcification. So where do these figures come? So in the sea, we know it's undetectable on a hobby-grade test kit. Now, obviously, we know the corals are getting live food all the time. So is there some correlation with the idea that when corals are in captivity, they are adapting to take up the nitrogen and phosphagen directly from the water column, rather than on the reef, where they'll be living in absolutely, or generally, in absolutely phosphate-free conditions that we can see on a test kit?
But they're also got the entire ocean providing that. So we can't run it like the ocean, because we have a limited box of water. So you can have a low level, but a whole ocean flowing over you, providing that low level constantly. So we need to treat our systems very different to the actual ocean, I would say.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Any more questions? Okay, pick someone. Paul.
Matt Drysdale.
Hi, question for Pat and Trina. You were described, basically you'd looked into like optimal methods for shipping. You mentioned about oxygen being around the heat packs to allow for for them to actually work. I mean, one thing we often see here is like a hole poked in the side of the box. Can you just elaborate a bit more on what you found and what you'd recommend?
At minus 30, that's not a good idea.
Yeah, we
It
did
might
try
be
that.
good for you, right? You're kind of in a more neutral temperature range at minus 30. Not entirely the world's best idea. We tried pumping oxygen into the boxes before we sealed them up. That's a terrible idea, because you crank in so much pure oxygen that the heat pack, it accelerates the reaction. It gets hotter now and then will burn out by origin. For us, it doesn't work. You just want to make sure you have air above the corals and fish. And so for us, in the summer, we can ship a box filled right to the brim, right? Stacked, where we're having to almost like push it down to get the lid on. But in the winter, our maximum is 2/3 if it's a reasonable destination, or 50% full, where we literally need that much air above the other bags, just so that the heat pack will have the oxygen to work until origin. And for us, or destination, sorry, and for us, it's not what is it going to be like when it gets to the destination if everything goes perfect. It's what happens when the airline loses the box and it's delayed for 12 hours or 24 hours. Right? How much is going to survive at that point? And we've had boxes come back 2 days later, and then we open the box and you're ready for total annihilation and everything to go in the bin. And meanwhile, we're 60, 70% survival with an additional 48 hours on the shipping. Yeah, so fish or coral, that's the question. Coral is a lot more water and not a ton of air. Fish is much more air, 2/3 air, 1/3 water. Inverts, they need more water than they need air, and don't party pack things, right? Everything should be individually packed. Make sure bags stay nice and tight and have tension in them. You want to watch that anything can't go into the corner of a bag, and when it's sitting there and it deflates a little bit, it gets squished into the corner, and then yeah, so you can tape those corners. We don't have round bottom bags where we are. They're not really attainable. Not easily, so everything is square bags, taping corners. Sometimes we'll double tie bags, and then the first bag gets inverted, and so then that creates a round bottom on the inner bag.
Fun.
So one thing I'll just add to that. So we actually did a bunch of experiments sending out boxes with like a temperature, like a little recorder of sorts, and then comparing data from that, and we're changing things like the thickness of the box, the amount of water in there, the number of holes punched into the lid, we tried that, and like all manner of like small, slight adjustments, and data logging it. And the number one most impactful variable is simply where you're sending the box on what day. It is like the outside temperature of your location, the location of whatever the shipping hub is, and the final destination of that box is like orders of magnitude more impactful than any of the other little tweaks that we tried.
Trina, did you want to add to that? Sorry.
Oh, we're just saying that we also check, because Canada's so big, it can be, right now, last week we had a heat wave for us, so it was 26 degrees, but some of the locations we were shipping to were 2 degrees in the daytime, not even in considering nighttime temperatures. So what our staff does, starting in about September, is we check the temperature of where it's going and then adjust everything for each destination to each store.
So we'll adjust box thickness, we'll adjust how much air we're putting in there, the number of heat packs. And so for here, if you're a fragger and you want to know how to ship corals, the data loggers are actually pretty cheap, right? But the easiest way is pack up a box, put your heat packs in it, pack exactly how you want to send it out, and then go put it in your van for the day and see how it does, right? Open it, see how your product is going to get to your customers, and then look at that and go, okay, if I was receiving this, would I be happy with this? And your van, when you're driving around for the day, let it slosh around in the back of the car, right? Go around those roundabouts with an extra couple heavy feet, right? To really toss it about. Because I guarantee you, UPS is not taking care of your box, right?
Okay, we've got 20 minutes left of questions before the raffle. Who's next, please?
In the orange.
Chap with the orange hoodie.
Just one for Patrick on the copper power level. So I was under the impression 2.5 ppm was the target we were aiming for, but I think you mentioned 2 pm.
That's what we target. So we find if we go to a higher level and we're going to 2.5, we'll start to see, you'll read reports online, oh, this angel doesn't do well in there, this puffer you can't have in copper, this angel doesn't do well at that, right? So for us, we'll target 2.0 at 1.026, and then that seems to be the value where the angels will still hold up really, really well. Like if we have an angel in copper for 6 or 8 weeks, I'm not worried about it. At 2.0, the only thing that we will notice is that like your zebrasoma at about 5 to 6 weeks, that seems to be about your maximum. At 5 to 6 weeks at that level, if you don't take them out of copper, you'll start to see lateral line erosion on them. Outside of that, I have no problem keeping every single fish, if it's a ornate leopard wrasse in copper at those levels, 100% success, no problem whatsoever.
Thank you. Who's next, please? Anyone? Any more questions from the floor?
I think Jamie mentioned earlier that within 10 years there could be a big reduction in import from corals. How do we think the UK market will adapt to that? Will it be kind of increasing farming or trying to buy from local farms internationally instead?
I mean, I don't work in the. Probably Paul's better to respond to that type of thing. I don't work as a coral farmer, so I would think Paul's going to be driving a Ferrari in 10 years' time, and the farm will expand tenfold.
I'm really concerned because I think we're very, very close to an international ban, because at the moment it's not data or science that's driving things, it's emotion. So that's what you've always got to remember. At the moment, the Hawaii fish ban is a classic example of something where emotion is ruling rather than science. So we're in a very dangerous time where, as I said, it used to be that people used to actually study things before they made decisions. Nowadays, we've got, and it used to be that there was a few hippies that were hanging around a fence with very little money in their pocket with animal rights. Now we're talking about people that are multi-millionaires, billionaires, that are financing some of this emotion. So I think it's inevitable that we will see, there will be a change. I think Jamie's right. There will be projects that start, and this is why I think it's very important to do, like Jamie's suggesting, that it's very important to acknowledge what we call biopiracy. You must keep it in the location where these corals come from. So that way there is an international trade. That way they are protecting the reefs, like Tony said, because they're looking after it. So I'm hopeful that there will be another way, but I don't think I think, Laura, is it this year, that 2024, where Indonesia stops export of all wild corals? Right, it's already been restricted this year. So, as I said, there's an awful lot of emotion out there. So I would say that right now it's really important to keep those corals healthy in captivity. But I think it's vitally important that when you see sort of stand up for your hobby is what I'm going to say, because we're faced with a. I don't think I'll be driving a Ferrari if that's the real answer.
To further that point on protecting the reef based on where the corals are coming from, Lombok, which is, so you have Bali right here, and then the neighboring island is Lombok. And Lombok used to have the most gorgeous reefs. If you went to Bali and you wanted to go snorkeling, you didn't go as much in Bali. You would take a boat over to Lombok. And then during COVID, with no tourism money coming in, the gold mines over in Lombok kind of went crazy, and there's no one there to see what they're doing. And they just dumped all their effluent out into the ocean, polluted the living daylights out of the ocean, and now the leaves are devastated over there, right? And so industry, especially in an unregulated country, has a tendency to just dump their wastes into the ocean. And if we don't provide an income for the local people there, then they're not going to protect the reef. These are third world countries where the people are poor, right? So you need to, that's why it's so important for this to be occurring at origin. Because when we provide a subsistence for the local people, they will protect the corals and they will protect the reef.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Any more questions?
Don't be shy. Come on.
Macroalgae for nutrient exports, good or bad? And do you believe that they have a potential of releasing harmful compounds into the water?
So say again, sorry, nutrient export?
Macroalgae is like
Macroalgae,
yeah.
so like refugiums, keto, caulerpa.
So keto, well, I've had the keto basically can release immunosuppressing chemicals to try to outcompete other algae in the tank. And do they have a potential of basically inhibiting coral growth?
Okay, did you catch that, guys? So macroalgae, can it be a force for bad for corals in the system or not? Any thoughts on that?
Okay, I'm going to tell you my opinion. I've done so many dives, and Jamie, you probably have done probably as many or more. When you go to a real, true coral reef, you do not find algae. You don't. They're in the lagoons, they're in the estuaries. That's where the algae are. But on a real, true coral reef, where our corals come from, you don't find them. So my opinion is, if it's not there, why should I put it in my system? Not only that, think about it this way. If you're an organism and you require nutrient, do you waste nutrient? Do you produce waste? And algae take in nutrients, and produce a waste. And that waste, is it toxic to the corals? Is it why you need to do an ICP? Is it why you need to do water changes? I don't agree with it. I've seen many tanks around the world, and I'll tell you this, the clearest water didn't have a refugium.
Okay, thank you, Tony. Jamie, macroalgae, good or bad? And do you run it in a sump?
I think with Salem's recent article about DOC and potentially refugiums fueling that, it's made me question certainly the way I run my systems. I do run a refugium at home, but I'm really scaling that back. At work, we don't have refugiums on the systems. We used to, again, we pulled those out quite a long time ago. For me, the jury's out on it. I think I don't have a positive or negative answer to it, but I'm going non-refugium from now on.
Yeah, I'm definitely non-refugium.
Oh, that's 3 out of 5.
Yeah, mainly because refugiums, like historically for tidal gardens, that's where all your problems proliferate forever. And, and they weren't providing enough benefit to have forever problems associated with them. I guess on a technical point, as far as using it as a method of filtration, I always kind of like struggled with using that type of biology as, I think, because it's not as consistent. Sometimes a batch of algae can be explosively overgrown. Sometimes it just doesn't grow. Sometimes it might go sexual. So there's like all these like inconsistencies as far as its ability to perform the function that you're looking for as well. So those two negatives greatly outweighed any of the positives for us.
Trina.
We grow a lot of macroalgae.
Sell a lot of macroalgae.
Right, but we have found that since we've been running we never used to run refugiums. We started running them, similar to Than said, it is the source of a lot of problems. We have heard some new information, like Jamie was saying, that has led us to be reevaluating how we run them in the new setup. Have we made a firm decision on that yet? He would be the right one to ask about that.
I think for us, the jury is out on that as well. Like we don't see a massive benefit from having a refugium on any of the systems. It's not like, oh, okay, we added the refugium and we saw X, Y, Z as a increase in growth or some benefit over here. Do I think they give you, like we have a lot of fish in our tanks to try to increase the bioload. So do I think they give you a great area for your pods to replicate? Yeah, I mean, that's a good use. Could you do that with a cryptic zone and fill it with live rock and then feed phytoplankton in there so the sponges really grow? Yeah, 100%. You could do that too.
I'm the same, actually. Yeah. The way I see it is on the reef, algae is a competitor.
Yes.
So basically, and I've also seen on people's failing aquariums, odd things like some wild corals do really well, but my captive grown frags weren't doing so well. There's a lot of microelements that are removed by algae. In fact, that's where we get some of our microelements from, like iodine, I believe, and things like that. So it seems odd that we're dosing iodine only for it to be consumed by the algae that's more competitive than the corals. So I've never run refugiums, but I do like the idea of a space for nature. The idea that a refugium is a little spot where you could nurse a mandarin with pod life and things like that. But like Fan and others have said, that's where you're going to grow your Raptasia.
Yeah, flatworms, everything.
And just quickly picking up on what Tony just said about, in the reef, going back to that example of Bonaire, where the Skittle D has kicked in and ravaged the reef below 8 meters, it is completely phase shifted to algae down there. So a lot of a species called Lobophora, it's just taking over the whole reef down there. And it's a pretty grey and lifeless area as a result. So...
The other thing I just wanted to add, which we run things differently again because we're a decent-sized commercial facility. In order to keep our invertebrate eating algae when they go into your tanks, we also have to run the refugiums and grow macroalgae so that we can feed them so that they're not eating pellets by the time they go to a tank and aren't just a nuisance. So I was going to say that's something that's also fueled our view on macroalgae as well when we look at it.
Grape caulerpa, if you have a shop or a home-based thing, the best thing you can possibly feed your urchins is grape caulerpa. You'll fill that tank up 50% of the way on Friday, and by the time you come in on Monday, they have decimated all of the grape caulerpa. So if you're running a shop and you need to keep animals alive, that's the best way to keep them alive. They stay super, super healthy on grape caulerpa. But right now we have a problem on our caulerpas anyway of a sea hare that has been breeding prolifically, and the babies are pelagic, so it is decimating our algae population that we're intentionally trying to grow in our refugiums.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else with any questions? Is that Jamie at the back?
You could have walked the front.
Sorry, boss. Question for the broad panel, and also Paul, really, is my understanding of keeping a reef tank is we keep a whole biome in a glass box. It's not just fish and coral, right? And I'm an old school keeper, and I believe live rock was the best we've ever had and the best systems run on live rock. But with the future and the diversification into sort of artificial rocks and false supplements and all the rest of it, what successes or challenges does your collective experience think we'll see in the future of the hobby?
Great question. Should we start with just a quick yes, no, and then we'll go back to it? So live rock or no live rock?
Live rock.
Jamie?
Live rock.
Dan?
I almost have amnesia. I haven't had new live rock for decades, it seems. I miss it. Because Marcus is not, like the new stuff is not as good.
Yes. Same, live rock.
Live rock, and ideally hand-picked, air-freighted live rock, not the boat rock.
Yeah, boat rock is not live.
Yeah.
It takes too long to get home.
Yeah, it just takes too long to get home. So for those of you that don't understand the difference, perhaps, this was a debate that used to exist many years ago, but a classic way of collecting live rock is they would collect it out of the ocean, then it's on their boat while they bring it to the shore, then it goes in a box, then it sits in that box for a few weeks while they collect enough rock to fill a container, then it's 2 weeks to load the container, then it's 6 weeks for the container to get to your country. By the time it gets there, your live rock is not live at all. So the only live rock that we'll use in our own tanks, and the live rock that really makes a difference, we have our collectors hand pick it out of the ocean, short duration into their facility, goes into large holding tanks, and then when it's coming to us, they'll wrap it with wet newspaper, and we're paying for the same priority of freight as the corals are coming in. So if you're looking for cheap, real live rock, that is not a thing, right? If you're willing to spend a lot more money and get real hand-picked, air-freighted live rock, the benefits are incalculable.
I also want to point out that this fake rock, a lot of this fake rock is solid core in the middle. And the only true denitrification you will ever get is in live rock, because it's porous all the way down to the core. And you'll get denitrification. You will not get denitrification with fake rock.
Yeah.
Okay, and on that note, we're going to wrap this up. This is a massive thank you for coming to Corals Freak. Thanks to Tony Vargas, Jamie Craggs, Dan Thane, Tina Parsons and Patrick Foster.
So there you have it. That is the third and final video of Coral Freaks Presents an Audience With. I hope you've enjoyed the last 3 episodes. If you have, please don't forget to leave me a comment below, subscribe to the channel. I also just want to say a huge shout out to AAC for putting on the show. This was an incredible show, which is exactly what the industry needs. So well done to the team down there, and certainly Paul Hughes for coming up with the idea for Coral Freaks. Stay tuned for everything else to come from the Yorkshire Reefer. And as always, there's plenty more sea in the fish.